bunch of weird cracks. I did think it was kind of interesting though, and it had a cool effect when I turned the piece 90 degrees. But with all that being said, the main point here is that scaling it up turned out to be a lot trickier than I thought. On the surface, the process appeared really simple, but every small detail seemed to matter. Eventually though, after a week of what felt like constant failures, I came up with a process that I felt would work. To try it out, I cooked up what I was hoping would be my last piece, and I soaked it in the same solvents. When that was eventually ready, I started making the pre-polymerized methacrylate, and this time, I used a lot less initiator. Instead of twice the amount, I now only use 20% more. Also, in general, I found that this was actually one of the hardest parts. This was because I found that there was an optimal thickness or viscosity that I had to bring it to, but it never seemed to take the same amount of time. Sometimes it was ready after as little as 15 minutes, and other times it took closer to 40. It's very possible that I was just doing something wrong, but either way, I ended up having to use a method that wasn't exactly super scientific. I basically just got good at shaking it around and looking at it, and knowing when it was ready. When it eventually got to what I felt was the right thickness, I pulled it out, and I dropped it into ice water. When it had cooled down to around room temperature, I poured it all into a large dish. I then dropped in the piece of wood, and I made sure that it was completely submerged. Now, I again had to do the 3 vacuum cycles on it, but this time I had to do them for much longer, at around 45 minutes each. I also pulled the strongest vacuum that I possibly could to try to get rid of all the acetone, as well as any unpolymerized methacrylate. I found that this was important because otherwise they would boil off as they sat in the oven and potentially introduce bubbles. There was a side effect to the extended vacuum though, and it caused the methacrylate to thicken a lot more. This made it very important to start with methacrylate that wasn't too thick, otherwise it would sometimes start to solidify before the end of the 3rd cycle. When it was done, I pulled it out, and I dropped it on a much larger glass plate. This plate was originally meant for 3D printers, and I had already treated it 4 times with mold release. I also made sure to completely polish the entire thing. Any unpolished parts could cause the acrylic to stick, and this was why one of my pieces ended up cracking. It could also cause it to not separate at all, and I really didn't want to have to smash any more glass. In most of the other runs, I used small wood spacers to help stabilize the glass plates, but I realized that they were actually sabotaging me almost the entire time. I think it took me way too long to find this out, but apparently